Hello and welcome. I am here to tell you all about the Scone Run Hat. Hey, hello, welcome. I am filming this kind of shorter video just to talk about the Scone Run Hat, which is a hat pattern that I developed and designed and is out now as of March 30th. So you'll find the link to purchase the pattern both on my website and on Ravelry down below. And if you're interested, I wanted to kind of give an overview of the hat, how it's constructed, the yardage you need, the materials as far as needles and other things that you need, and any other tips I can provide about the hat. So here we are. So to start off, the construction of this hat is pretty simple. It's bottom up. I'd say that this is definitely a pattern that a confident beginner could knit, or up to an intermediate. The hardest thing you're going to have to do is double knitting, which isn't hard, it's just time consuming in my opinion, but it may be a new stitch if you are more of a beginner knitter. But that is kind of the biggest technique you need. Otherwise it's double knitting, ribbing, like a wide 3x3 rib here, and then just knit two together through the back to make your decreases, and then easy weave-in ends, all of that kind of stuff. So I think this is a pretty good pattern for maybe an intermediate beginner, or just something, you know, whatever skill level. If you want to just work on this, I think it makes a great little hat, obviously. So as I mentioned, it has a double knit brim. So this part is double thick, and you're using the double knitting stitch. So, you know, double thick. There are ways to knit it with two yarns at the same time. So you can see this hat has this color on one side and then this purple color on the other. And so I did the double knitting holding two different strands. So my right side work was knit with this, and my wrong side work was knit with this. I heard from testers during this that they actually were then able to work both rows of the double knitting at the same time. So normally with double knitting, you have one round of knit slip, and then you'll have a round of slip knit, so that basically every other row you're working either the front side or the back side. And so 2 rows equals 1 row in finished fabric, if that makes sense. There is a way where you're able to actually use 2 different strands to work your whole thing at the same time, which could save you a lot of time, because I will admit the double knitting takes forever. This little double knit portion of the hat, the brim, took me twice as long as all of the ribbing. Like this ribbing, an hour. Took me an hour to knit this entire baby hat with the ribbing. Double knitting, I had to work on it over multiple days because it does take a while. So a lot of my testers did have good luck with working double knitting 2 strands at a time, or like basically working both rows at the same time using 2 strands. I have tutorials linked in the pattern for how to do that. I haven't personally done it, but I think that it is a great idea to save yourself a little bit of time on the double knitting, because it does take a while, but it makes a nice thick brim. And that's what I really wanted from this hat, was something where it's really thick, it covers your ears nicely, but then the top of the hat's a little bit more breathable, because my ears get so cold. So I don't know. And the double knitting's nice because with superwash yarn, both of these hats are made out of superwash yarn. It typically has a lot more flop when it's done. And so I've made hats out of superwash yarn before because it's easier to work with. The colors are nicer. I find then, like, I don't have to worry as much about sensitivity to itchiness or anything on my scalp, because it's superwash. It's a little bit softer. But superwash is also really floppy, and you know, you can see the top of this hat is very kind of floppy, wiggly, and all that. And so when I've made superwash hats in the past using like a ribbed pattern or anything like that, I found that the brim is then very floppy, doesn't stay up nicely, and kind of slowly slides down. But with a double knit brim, like this feels very solid. It's not going anywhere. So, well, the top of the hat's still very floppy, and comfy there, where it can be kind of floppy because it needs to stretch and everything, the brim is going to stay in place and keep you warm because it's double knit, and so it has a little bit more structure to it. So you work your double knit brim, and then you will transition to working 3x3 ribbing. So you'll have to decrease your stitch count, and then you just start working 3x3 ribbing, work that for a little bit, and then you start your little decreases so that you make little points here. And that is why it's called the Scone Run Hat, is because it reminds me of a scone with like kind of this wide rectangular shape that decreases into a point at the very top. And so it reminded me of scones while I was making it, and I decided like this would be the perfect hat to wear as you go grab yourself a scone from a local bakery or something like that. So there we go. That's kind of the construction, and then you can see both of these hats have little embroidery patches added. So I do have instructions for both of these embroidery patches, and then information on where to find other embroidery patches and how to attach them to the hat as an addendum to the pattern. So if you'd like to make your own flavor of scone, you can either make a blueberry or pumpkin with the instructions provided, or a lot of my testers did raspberries and did kind of some other options. So you're also really welcome to branch out. I'd love to see what flavor of scone you make. And I've included DMC as a resource, in which they have a lot of really great free embroidery patterns that you could definitely use to make yourself a little patch or freestyle it as well. So I hope that you will make your own flavor of scone and hopefully find those instructions useful. So the yardage for this hat, it uses a DK weight yarn, and I have sizes available from baby, which is this, to adult large, which is designed to fit a 24-inch head circumference. So we go from 15.75 inches to 24 inches in size range. That means there's 5 different sizes available. This is the baby. I'm wearing the adult small, which is meant to fit a 22-inch head circumference. And I will say, if you are in between sizes, I recommend sizing down. It's better if the hat squeezes a little bit more than is too loose. And the yarn that you're going to need is between 95 and 320 yards of DK weight yarn, depending on your size. For the adult small that I knit here, I do have some built-in cushion to the pattern for yardage, but I will say that I actually got away with using about 100 grams for this hat. So I've written that you need about 240 yards. Some DK weight yarns, 100 grams is about 240 yards, so you can get away with maybe one skein. If you have like a really special skein of DK weight yarn, you might be able to get away with it, or just you can use kind of some scrap yarn maybe on the inside of the brim or something like that to get you all the way there. A lot of my testers did that, where they had one of my testers, Sean, over on YouTube and Instagram, she made a whole project vlog, by the way, about this hat. So I will have that linked below too if you want to see her experience knitting it. But she wanted to use a 50-gram special skein that she had. And so what she ended up doing, because 50 grams isn't enough to knit the hat, is she knit the front side of the brim with that color, and then the back side was like a gray she had in stash, and then she knit like the first inch or so. I can show you on this one. She knit like the first inch or so that is hidden when you fold up with that gray yarn, so that everything that is visible is in that nice color that she wanted to show, but she was able to, get away with using a smaller amount by making the things invisible out of another color. So that is also another option for you if you are really trying to kind of squeeze out some yarn, or squeeze out a hat with a smaller quantity of yarn. I think that this hat is really friendly for that because there's a lot of area that you can hide. And the double knit brim does take up a lot of yarn. This was about 50 grams of yarn, and the rest is less than that. So be prepared for that. For me, I have a small head, so the hat is not very long for me. So for other people, you may want to make it a little bit longer. That of course has yardage implications, but as the hat is written, I feel like it's also, you don't have a lot of room at the top. It's sitting right against my head. And so that also makes it a little bit more yarn friendly because it's not super long either. So if you did want to make it longer, beware, it's going to change the yardage, but as it sits now, with it being a little shorter, it should also be a little bit friendly for you there. And this one, it covers the very top of my ears, and kind of just my earlobe is out. So if you have a small head, or you also like hats that don't have too much room, this could also be a good idea for you. I've also been thinking a lot, I didn't do this or have any testers that did this, but I think that you could make this hat reversible very easily, depending on how well you weave your ends in to make them invisible. But you can see, so this is kind of the way the hat is meant to sit, like this. But I can flip it inside out and turn the brim the other way, and I've kind of got another version of the hat. And you can see it's not a seam here, but double knitting, when you work it in the round, there will be kind of, at your beginning of round, kind of an odd spot here where it is almost like, it's just a little odd. So you can see that on the reversible side, but theoretically you could also make, you know, a second color of the brim here. So you could have, for instance, on this one, like a fully monochrome hat, and then when you flip it, you could have the fun brim if you wanted to do something like that to make it more reversible. Okay, then as far as other materials you need for this hat, you just need a US 2 or 2.75 millimeter knitting needle to knit the brim, and you can, for most sizes, get away with like a 16-inch circumference. For, you know, the baby sizes, you probably need to either work magic loop, or if you have kind of a shorty set of needles, that would be best here. And then for the ribbing itself, you will need a US 3 or 3.25 millimeter needle to knit up the ribbing, and be prepared to probably work a little bit of magic loop at the top, unless you have another, or double pointed needles or something, but just for the very top with a very small circumference, you will need to work some sort of small circumference knitting. And so otherwise you'll need a beginning of round marker, a measuring tape, and a darning needle to both weave in your ends and finish the little top here, because you'll take those last few stitches and just basically pull the yarn through them to bind off. And so pretty light on materials. If you do then want to do the embroidery patch, you will need embroidery thread. I specifically used DMC embroidery thread, and I used 2 strands of it. So it comes in 6 strands when you get it, and you can kind of just pull 2 strands out. I do have a tutorial on how to do this linked in the pattern, the embroidery pattern addendum, if you've never worked with embroidery before. And so I used 2 strands of that in 3 different colors for this one, a few different, I think there's 5 colors on here. And then I had 1 sheet of felt. You can get away with making a lot of the patches on just the 1 sheet of felt, because they're pretty small patches. And then I had a similar color to the felt in sewing thread to attach this to my hat. And then I needed scissors and embroidery needles. And then I also used stick-on stabilizer, where I could print my pattern onto it and then stitch that. So if you are interested in that as well, I do have some information on different transfer techniques, including this one, and where you can find stitch-on stabilizer if you'd like to do that as well. So I think it's pretty simple on materials, as you'd expect from just a hat. And the embroidery is also pretty simple on materials. So hopefully you have most things around your house, or everything is available for multiple uses if you do have to purchase something. All right, and the final thing that I want to say about this hat is that the gauge for it is pretty tight. Double knitting is supposed to be 26.5 stitches across, and when you are counting your gauge for double knitting, you want to just count the finished object. So on here, when you're knitting, double knitting, you've kind of got both the back and the back and the front stitches on this needle at the same time. But on your finished fabric, you're only going to see like 26 stitches on the front, even though the area of 26 stitches when you're working it actually has double that, because you're working, so 52 stitches, because you're working both the front and the back at the same time. But to count gauge for double knitting, it's just 26.5 across here, and then it's 40 stitches long for a 4x4" gauge swatch. And again, counting this way, every 2 rows is 1 stitch. So you're counting the finished fabric, not your working stitch count for double knitting. And then your 3x3 gauge is going to be 26.5 stitches wide and 37 rows long for a 4x4" square. And so I found it very comfortable to knit this up at double knit. In a double knit weight, obviously I'm the designer, and so I am kind of working with just my own gauge to start with. But I did have a few testers that kind of struggled to meet gauge, and some were even able to size down to a fingering weight yarn and still knit up the pattern. And so if you do struggle with being a looser knitter, or if you're kind of choosing your yarn and looking at using a thicker DK weight yarn, because there is kind of a broad range, I feel like, within DK weight of like some things are very thin and some things are very thick, I would recommend maybe going for a thinner DK weight. But I mean, this yarn here, none of the yarns I worked with felt especially thin for DK weight, but I know that there's thicker ones. So I would just keep that in mind if you are having problems. Maybe try fingering weight or a thinner yarn, or of course you can size down your needles as well. But I did want to mention the gauge here. But in my experience, I am also a very loose knitter, or I used to be. And so I think that hopefully for the majority of folks, you will find that the gauge is not too difficult to meet. All right. Yep, that's what I've got to tell you about the Scone Run Hat. This was so fun to work on. It was such a joy to work with my tester group. We have 8 beautiful finished objects from them, so I'll kind of have some of those showing on the screen as I'm talking about this, but they were seriously a wonderful group of testers. Can't say enough great things about all of them, and I hope that you enjoy this hat. I hope that you're interested in making it. I think that it's really fun and simple. Like, it's obviously quite a simple hat, but I love the thicker brim, and I'm really excited to see what you all do with it. If you want to put an embroidery design on it, do something completely different on the brim, I think the brim gives you a lot of creative freedom here because it is really thick fabric that you can, attach embroidery to, embroider directly onto, whatever you want to kind of do with this brim. It's kind of an open canvas for you. And, the hat itself without something added is also beautiful. Like, I can flip it around and show you. If you don't want anything on your brim, it's still just a nice, simple, cozy hat. And so I'm really excited to see all of your potential creations in the future. And thanks for tuning in to learn more about this hat. And I will talk to you soon. And please, 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 if you knit this hat, share your experience in the comments below. Send me photos of it. Add it on Ravelry. I would really love to see them all. So thanks for watching. If you are interested, again, in purchasing this pattern for yourself and making it for yourself, you can find the link to both my website where I sell the pattern and my Ravelry where you can buy the pattern. Same price on either. Whatever's easiest for you, you can purchase both down below. So, all right, thank you. Bye-bye.